Today we are visiting the old Sandhurst burial ground in Bendigo, Victoria, to visit what is believed to be the final resting place of an Irish convict transported to Australia in 1837. Her name was Judith McCoy. And here it is, under this car park. Now, there are no obvious memorials or signs to indicate that beneath this concrete lay the remains of at least 229 people, and I believe there are probably a lot more. Now, there is a small stone memorial, but it took me ages to find it. We looked everywhere and even asked a few people. They were locals and they also had no idea that this used to be a burial ground. I used to catch the bus every day on my way to high school on this exact car park. No idea what I was walking on top of. Finally, we did ask the right person and he was able to help us. Now, from my research, I believe that the community has been trying to do something about the remains of the people in this cemetery since the 1870s. But as of November 2024, nothing has been done. But more about that later. So there's the burial ground, and apparently the memorial is down here. Alright, down here, totally away from where you think it would be. Down, 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 down. Oh, and here at the back of Mulqueen's Funerals, here we go. The former Sandhurst Cemetery was Bendigo's first formal cemetery. Wow. Okay, so I guess that makes sense if you're coming from this way, but who comes from this way? Interesting. So let's get to the reason why we are here today. The life of an Irish convict named Judith McCoy. Now, Judith had a number of aliases throughout her life. She was known as Mary Conway, Judith Hayden, and Julia Hayden, but her registered burial name was her married name of Julia Hayden. Julia's death was recorded by Dr. Henry Bacchus. He was the first Catholic priest on the Bendigo Diggings. His records do not show a place of burial because Julia died only 3 months prior to the official registration of deaths on the goldfields. Births, deaths and marriages Victoria have her registered as being buried here at the old Sandhurst burial ground, but is she here? I contacted a local historian, Bev Hanson, who has volunteered for over 21 years with the Bendigo Cemeteries Trust, and she has also hand-copied the 229 registered burials here at the burial ground from their original death certificates. She leans towards Julia having been buried here, as do I, but we have no positive proof because of the timing. Burials also frequently occurred in the bush with no official records existing. But I believe the fact that Dr. Bacchus recorded Julia's death leads me to believe that she was buried in a proper manner and most likely here at Bendigo's first official cemetery. So, as you can see, the former Sandhurst burial ground lies buried beneath a few metres of earthfill and is partially covered by the car park of the Tom Flood Sports Centre. The grounds contain the burials of many of Bendigo's early non-Indigenous settlers who arrived in the area during the gold rush. and it's believed that the majority of burials remain intact beneath the fill. The Sandhurst burial ground was Bendigo's first formal cemetery, operating from July of 1853 until March of 1854. Gold had been found in the nearby Bendigo Creek in the spring of 1851 by two women from the Ravenswood Run, a Margaret Kennedy and Julia Farrell, so people soon began to pour into the area and a cemetery was needed. As the people began to arrive, a government camp was marked out on Camp Hill, which is now the beautiful Roslyn Park in the centre of Bendigo, by surveyor George Urquhart in 1852. The new camp contained the headquarters of government officials and police who were to oversee the Bendigo goldfields. 2 years later, in 1854, an act was passed requiring cemeteries to be located 1 mile outside of a town. So burials at the Sandhurst burial ground stopped. After its closure, the condition of the burial ground soon began to deteriorate. Complaints were made about the decline and improvement projects were planned, but none of them were ever acted upon. There were plans in the 1870s to remove the bodies and reinter them at other cemeteries, but this also didn't happen. No reinterments have ever taken place, according to the Heritage Council of Victoria. So Judith McCoy was born around 1816 in Dublin in Ireland. And I've put Judith's convict description into my Find My Convict Ancestor ChatGPT, and this is what the image maker has given me. Now, 20-year-old Judith was described as 5 foot 1 inch, dark complexion, oval face, dark brown hair, high forehead, dark eyebrows, grey eyes, medium nose, small mouth and small chin. And I've asked for an image of her as a young 20-year-old when she would have been transported, and also as an older woman in her late 30s at the time of her death. And that's the great thing about convict description records. We can get a unique insight into how our ancestors looked before the invention of photography. Most wouldn't have had the money to sit for a portrait or sketch. 20-year-old Judith was single and working as a laundrymaid in Liverpool, England in the summer of 1837 when she was tried for stealing clothes and silver spoons at the Lancaster Quarter Sessions held in Liverpool, and she received a sentence of 7 years transportation for larceny by a servant. There is also a record of her being on the town for 6 months. Now, I have read a number of interpretations of what on the town means. Oh, that guy looks like he's on the town. From prostitution to being reliant on the church or state for their existence. And many female convicts have this on their records, and I don't know which one is accurate. So if anyone can fill me in, please do. Leave a comment or an email because I'd love to know the accurate meaning of on the town. And of course I will share that with everyone when I know. Now I just want to also add a little caveat here to let you know the references that I am using to state that I have the correct Judith and Julia. I haven't been able to find that one golden record to prove or confirm that I have the correct Judith, and I would usually like to have that before declaring a convict is buried in a certain place. But because records were so sketchy on the goldfields around the time Judith would have been in Bendigo, I am relying on the work of some very, very reputable genealogists and researchers. Firstly, the Female Convict Research Centre in Hobart. They have a brilliant online database of female convicts transported to Tasmania. Next is the family history detective Tricia Curry. Now, she was a managing research assistant on the Founders and Survivors Project. And then finally, the work of Janet McCullman, who wrote the book Vandemonians, The Repressed History of Colonial Victoria. They all referenced Judith McCoy as being the Julia Hayden who died on the goldfields in Bendigo in April of 1853. Now, If you haven't heard of the term Vandemonians before, here's what it means. Janet McCullman writes in her fantastic book Vandemonians, it was meant to be Victoria the Free, uncontaminated by the convict stain. Yet they came in their tens of thousands as soon as they were cut free or able to bolt. More than half of all those transported to Van Diemen's Land as convicts would one day settle or spend time in Victoria. There they were demonised as Vandemonians. Some could never go straight. A few were the luckiest of gold diggers. A handful founded families with distinguished descendants. Most slipped into obscurity. Burdened by their pasts and their shame, their lives as free men and women, even within their own families, were forever shrouded in secrets and lies, which is why it can be quite difficult to find what happened to a lot of them. They change their names, use aliases, shorten their names, all sorts of things to just hide that convict past, the convict stain, as it was once known as. After Judith was convicted in Liverpool, she was put onto the transportation ship the Atwick in September of 1837, and on board were 151 female convicts, many of whom had been convicted in Scotland. Professor Lucy Frost has researched the lives of the women on the Atwick, with a focus on the Scottish women. 83 of the women were mothers, and it is horrifying to learn that most of the children, or their children, were left behind. Professor Frost writes, of the 83 prisoners' children noted in the convict conduct records, a mere 18 sailed. This means that 65 children suffered the loss of their mother. They were unlikely ever to see her again, a loss mimicking death and often skewered by the particular cruelty of not knowing what had happened to their illiterate mothers, not knowing whether they were alive or dead. At least the children who sailed would end up in the same part of the world as their mothers, though they lost their fathers and often their brothers and sisters. The Atwick arrived in Van Diemen's Land in January of 1838, and Judith was assigned to a Mr. Richard Barker of Macquarie Plains, probably to work as their free domestic servant. Richard was a brewer. I struggle saying that word, brewer. He was a brewer in London before coming to Tasmania in 1816 with his wife Frances and their 3 sons, and the family worked in import-exports. The assignment looks to have been a rocky one. A few months after her arrival, Judith was forced to apologise to her master for refusing to do her work and insolence to her mistress. Judith complied and returned to her service. 2 months later, she was confined to a cell and put on bread and water for 3 days and 3 nights for refusing to work on the previous Monday morning. Now, her name was mistakenly recorded as Mary Conway. And look, I don't blame her. I don't know what the Barker family were like, but Judith was basically free slave labour for them. To clean, cook, do laundry, and possibly help with the 3 boys. She was probably exhausted. So the jail time must have worked on poor Judith, because she received no punishments until over a year later, when in the May of 1840, she was again put into a cell for 3 days on bread and water for insolence and disobedience. But this time she wasn't returned to the Barker family. She was instead sent to the Female Factory or Female House of Correction in Hobart for 3 months probation. Now, it was around this time, or soon after, that Judith met her future husband, convict Thomas Hayden. Now, of course, I put Thomas's convict description into my ChatGPT because it's fun, and here we have an image of Thomas when he was transported at 19 years of age for stealing 70 pounds of beef and 11 pounds of mutton. And here's an image of him a little older. Now, Thomas was a plasterer from Essex, and I love this record that I found with the most amazing writing on it. It said he was a plasterer of only the 1st and 2nd coat. So I assume that means don't ever ask him for a 3rd coat. I have no idea about plastering, so how many coats do you need? I do not know. Anyway, I just thought that was really funny, and I'd never seen anything like that on a convict record before. The 2 were married in this stunning church, St. John's Anglican Church in Newtown, in Tasmania, on the 12th of June in 1841. Both Judith and Thomas were still convicts, and as such were under strict rules about what they could and couldn't do. Both received punishments for being out late and in a public house, returning drunk from a night out, of which Judith's punishment was 1 month at the wash tub. Sounds like a nightmare. Another time she received 1 month's hard labour at the Female Factory for misconduct, and 7 days in solitary for misconduct. Finally, Judith received her certificate of freedom in 1844. Thomas received a 1-month sentence for making use of bad language, and he appears to have had a bit of favour with law enforcement, as he had had a hand in apprehending a fellow convict who had been absent for 9 months, just before the two were married. Thomas eventually received his conditional pardon 3 months after he was married, and his certificate of freedom in 1846. So both Judith and Thomas had now received their freedom certificates, allowing them to travel anywhere within the colony, though they would of course never be able to return to the British Isles. Unfortunately, this is where the records for the couple end. Surprisingly, I haven't been able to find any birth records for children. If you're a descendant of Judith or have additional information about her life, please reach out. You can leave a comment or email me directly. Together we can break through these brick walls. But for now, Judith, known as Julie, her preferred name, has been found and her story remembered.